Hello, Sales Nation. I'm your host, Will Barron, and welcome to another episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Tibor Shanto, and we're talking about gap selling and finding out what that gap is, which is essentially not, which I said this all the way through the show, Tibor corrects me, but it's not the problems that your customers have that your products can solve. It's the objectives they have and how your products can help them get there. And that simple change and shift in definition and idea of selling is a total game changer. I took a lot out of this interview myself, so hopefully you will too. You can find out more about Tibor over at sellbetter.ca. And just before we get into the show, once again, a quick reminder that if you leave a review on iTunes for the podcast, it doesn't have to be 5 stars, just be honest with your review. I don't want to be skewing the results of it all, but if you leave an honest review, tell us what you think. 4, 5 stars preferable, obviously. Drop me an email at will at salesman.red. Get that right. I will send you over some salesman.red and Salesman Podcast stickers. Simple as that. Quick shout out to a couple of people who left reviews yesterday specifically. Paul Garcia, Angie Gardner, Matthew Tyler, Stephen Little, who I'm just about to reply to email Stephen after this goes up. And look, he said he didn't even want the stickers. You're more than welcome to have them, but I'm not gonna force them onto you, mate. Thanks for supporting the show, guys and girls. Keep the reviews coming in. It means a lot to me. It means that basically we shoot up the iTunes rankings every time there's a couple of reviews left. More people get to see the show. More downloads means I can spend more time doing it. Yada yada, all the good stuff. Bigger guests, better guests, more often. So it's good for everyone. Hopefully it's the whole cliche of win, win, win. So with that said, without further ado, let's jump into today's show with Tibor. Hi Tibor, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Great to be here, Will. How are you doing?
I am good, sir. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Always ready to rock and roll.
Good man, good man. Okay, so today we're going to talk about gap selling, or specifically how to uncover the gap between where the salesman lies and where the prospect has problems, and how to uncover the problems and how to potentially deal with them.
Right.
But tell me if I'm right here, because I might be totally off, but I think this is how, or a good way to describe the term value. And I see value as the difference between where the salesman is and where the prospect's problems are solved. I think that's like the role of the salesman there. Do you define value in a different way, or is that a reasonable way of summing it up?
I do it just slightly. The way that you phrased it, I think you're in the right place, but I think the way that you phrased it is slightly salesperson, sales organization, call it vendor centric. So it's not so much where the salesperson is and the gap or the distance to where the customer's problem is, because again, and as I'm sure we'll get into it, if you focus on problems, there's a whole bunch of segment or a whole part of the market doesn't see itself having a problem situation. So the way that I define it specifically is helping the customer move from where they are right now towards their objectives, so removing any hurdles or barriers, or helping them gap any distances between where the customer is and where their objectives are. And the reason that that distinction is different is it puts the limelight, or at least the spotlight, back on the customer, and customers like that.
Yeah.
The other is it does bring in what's going on both sides of the equation. And I think, again, there's a lot of writing out there now that some of the issues aren't necessarily how salespeople sell, but it has much to do with the way that customers buy. So I think by getting the salesperson to focus on where the customer is, what their objectives are, and what the perceived and real barriers are, then we can move towards eliminating those barriers, or helping the customer look at it differently, that maybe what they see as a barrier is in fact something that can accelerate or help them move towards their success. So let's put the customer in the center of things, and then we can work around them to help them.
Okay, so when you say the changes in the way the customers buy, is that it's just simply the internet and the change of salespeople used to hold all the information and that was part of their job to provide it. Now that part of the salesperson's job isn't necessary potentially in that first instance.
No, I think that's a bit overdone, for various reasons in the market these days, because, I don't think really things have changed as much as people like to pretend they have. I think the packaging has changed, and if you look, we don't dress the same way we did in the 70s. I'm sure I have a pair of bell bottoms somewhere, but I don't wear them anymore. But inside, as human beings, we haven't changed that much. So I think, I did a piece for one of the local papers, and the way I tried to describe it in that piece is if you look at sales as being three concentric circles, the middle circle, the very inner circle, being why it is that people buy, and in the context of our conversation, why does a B2B buyer buy something? The second circle around that is how have been the tools that both salespeople and customers can use, and there's certainly been change in that circle. And then what are the tools, sorry, that salespeople and customers
Mhm.
can leverage in their journey? And then lastly, how did salespeople use those tools, leverage those tools, and develop techniques to help the customer make the purchase? So I think there's been a lot of change in the outer circle. I think there's been measurable change in the second circle, but the core circle, why people buy, I don't think that's changed all that much. So, you know, again, I don't wear my bell bottoms anymore, but, I'm sure I'm just a grown up version of what I was in the 70s.
I want to come on to something you mentioned very beginning of the show in after this, in that you were talking about when customers potentially don't know that they have problems that salesmen can solve. Because I've been in that situation, especially in the medical device world. You're dealing with, or I was dealing with the NHS. They feel like everything's running smoothly, but from the outside looking in, even not as a trained medical professional, just having business experience and having experience of process and making things run smoothly and efficiency, a lot of the times it's an absolute mess. But internally, perhaps it can be difficult to see that from the inside out. So I want to come on to problems that people don't realize they have in a little bit. But what is the best way to go about engaging with people who know they have a problem, perhaps have reached out to you in the first instance? And how do we go about? I don't think we need to cover like open questions, closed questions, things like that. Of what's your biggest weakness in the world of business? 'Cause I think like that stuff like that either comes naturally or it's totally contrived and it sounds horrible. And that conversation is the sign of a when I've been working with salespeople of a very very green salesperson. But what I'm interested in, Tibor, is how do we go deeper than that with the prospect? How do we talk to them and they've got X problem, but in reality the problem goes deeper than that, and how do we uncover the crux of the matter, the big game changing pivot points that we could potentially help with?
Okay, so I'll cover your answer specifically, but I need to set it up. So give me sort of 90-second birth here.
Sure, sure.
Again, you keep using the word problems, and I think that very small section of the market realizes that they have a problem, right? So, you know, the other day, my hard drive broke down. I knew I had a problem. Went in my
Mhm.
car, went down to Best Buy, got a new hard drive, took it over to my friend, and he rebuilt my hard drive. I had a problem. Now, there are a whole bunch of things that I was trying to get done in the meantime, like close deals and deliver against contracts that I've already had and so forth, that weren't really a problem, right? We like to have contracts because they lead to invoices, right? And those
Mhm.
invoices lead to checks coming back, which is a good thing, right? So, but if somebody would have come to me and showed me a couple of ways that I could achieve what I needed to do, then I probably would have been listening to them. If they would have said to me, "What's your problem?" I would have said, "I don't have one. My hard drive crashed, but I got it under control." And that quote unquote sales conversation would have been shut down. So I'd like to quickly lay out something that'll put the whole thing into context. So if you look at the overall market, whatever your market is, right? You're selling forklifts or you're selling warehousing services or you're selling IT solutions. There's a defined market. There's going to be a segment of the market that's going to be potentially buying that product. So medical devices you mentioned, not a lot of call for them in lawyers' offices, so they wouldn't be, although they probe a lot, but you know, that wouldn't be a target market for you, right? So
Mhm.
if you take your defined market, at any given time, only a small portion of it is actively in the market. That is a self-declared buyer. This is this mythical buyer that everybody keeps talking about, who's out there on your website, who's talking to his buddies in social media, and knows way more than you do by the time he connects with you, because he's been out there trying to scratch this itch that he has, right? Then you have about 20% of the market that knows they're going to have to buy something new, but they have the luxury of maybe 12 to 18 months before they have to make that. So their contract doesn't end until November 2016, or their medical device traditionally turns over every 3 years, and we're into
Mhm.
the second year of that cycle. So they know they're going to have to make a purchase decision, but because in their mind they don't have to make it for 12, 18 months, then they have the luxury of deferring it. So good opportunity for salespeople to engage because you've got a nice long runway. But unless you can accelerate that cycle, which is rarely the case, then you just have to accept the fact that your efforts are going to pay off in the next fiscal year as opposed to this fiscal year, which is
Mhm.
not the worst thing because you're setting yourself up for success in the future. But until
Yep.
they get closer to that event, they're going to be passive as opposed to active, right? So
Mhm.
this 30% of the market, and we're talking rough numbers, it'll vary from industry to industry, but this 30% of the market to some degree is where the internet is effective and some of these marketing automation because these people are coming to you. They're going to go to Google and do a search. They're going to go somewhere and scratch this itch that they have, right? Whatever that itch might be. But that still leaves 70% of the market that isn't engaging with any of these new tools that everybody's talking about because they're head down doing their thing, right? They're successful. We all read about companies that, for the last 5, 6 years have been, I'm working with a company now that's had a compounded growth rate for the last 10 years of 13%, right? They don't have a lot of problems. The only reason they're talking to me is they have some ambitions of taking that to 15%, and they also want to buy another company, and one of the ways that they want to merge the two sales teams is to introduce some new training so everybody has a new dance tune that they can hit the floor with. So to me, 70% of the market is impervious to this whole pain and problem stuff. But unless you're digging into that 70%, you're narrowing yourself to a small part of the market where you're scratching and competing with every other salesperson who's willing to drop their pants for a nickel. And that's where you get this, discounting spiral and, all this noise and all that. And you don't get a lot done. And what, 50, 60% of salespeople made their sales numbers last year. So to me, the opportunity and why I keep saying don't focus on the problem is that there's this 70% of the marketplace that's ripe for the taking, but speaks a language other than problems. And if you're going to go out there and be a solution running around the countryside looking for a problem, you're going to miss these people.
Okay.
So now,
So
to your point,
yeah.
every company, every business person has objectives. The reason you're talking to me is my objective is to expand my audience, and your objective is to service your audience to bring a different, frame of view to get more people to your website. So we both have objectives, neither of which are grounded in the problem, other than the fact that we're greedy and we want to grow our business, which is a good thing,
Mhm.
right? So to me, the only way you're going to be able to engage with that 70%, which is a big part of the market, think about it, right? Especially since it's not being pursued by a lot of salespeople, is to change your focus from problems to objectives, because every business has objectives, right? Now, if you're in that 30%, 10% active, you got a real pain, your objective is to get rid of that pain. But if you're that 70% that doesn't have a pain or doesn't perceive the pain, and again, remember, I could tell the guy up and down that bell bottoms are out of fashion, but if that's what he likes, he's going to wear them, right? So he doesn't perceive that he has a problem. So if they don't perceive that they have a problem, then the natural approach that most salespeople have is not going to work. So what I got to figure out is what are their objectives? Because every business person has some level of objectives, right? And the other thing about objectives, because they're forward looking, they generally tend to be more positive than the here and now or the past, where we tend to
Mhm.
remember more the pain. You know, one thing I would encourage your audience to do is go to YouTube and find the commercial from, I think it's Prudential. And the ones in the States will recognize it because this commercial is currently running on TV. And they get a bunch of people and they get these big magnetic walls up and they tell the people to put all the significant things in their life over the last 5 years on one board. And if it was good, they tell them to have it yellow. And if it was bad, they tell them to put a blue magnet on there. And then they have them do the same exercise looking forward for the next 5 years. And what's interesting is everything looking forward is all yellow. It's all positive. It's all optimistic. People are looking forward to the future, right? Everything in the last 5 years is a good mix, if not slightly more blue. So people tend to be,
Mm.
they know the pains and all that. So by looking at objectives, you're tapping into a lot of future looking thinking, a lot of positive thinking, a lot of optimism because people will make an effort to achieve their objectives. So how do you do that with customers? Well, some of them you're going to know. If you're selling a product like medical devices, you're going to know your marketplace. You're going to know the type of things they're trying to look forward to through talking to them and exploring why it is that you lose deals and why it is that you win deals and why it is that some deals just don't go to decision, right? Depending which industry you're in and who you look at, about 30% of stuff that salespeople put into the top of the pipeline doesn't come out the other end. It's neither deals you lose or deals you win. They just don't make a decision, right?
Hmm.
So if you review those three types of deals, you begin to see certain objectives that you've been able to help customers achieve. You'll learn about certain frustrations that customers have had in trying to achieve those objectives, but they're willing to try. So again, if you get into the discipline of reviewing why it is that you're winning and not so much because you're cute and you got good pricing and your marketing has nice glossy brochures, but going back to customers and understanding what impact you've had on their business. So I talk to my customers, and that's why I have case studies on my website, and I could definitively tell you specific impacts I've had for my clients. So now that allows me to go and talk to other customers of that nature and start talking to them about their objectives and where they're trying to go and ascertain whether they have a solid game plan for getting there, whether I can improve on that game plan, because now I'm tapping into their aspirations, their ambitions. So let's give you a couple of specifics. If I know nothing, which wouldn't be a good thing, you should do your research and all that. But if I know nothing and I sit down with a marketing VP or an owner of a medium-sized company or something like that,
Hmm.
one of the first questions I would say is, Will, if we were sitting here 18 months from now and your team had hit a grand slam, or for the Europeans, won the World Cup, um, what would that look like? It's a fairly innocent question, but what I've just done is I've allowed him to let go of all the realities of today. So whatever was nagging him, a supplier being late, his secretary brought him a decaf instead of a caffeinated coffee, whatever things are bugging him right now, I'm saying, look 18 months into the future and tell me what nirvana looks like. You physically see them changing at their desk and relaxing, looking up. Sometimes they put their hands over their heads and they start telling you where they want to be 18 months from now. So you're tapping into that yellow in that commercial, right? And
Hmm.
you'd be surprised the type of things they tell you because A, you're the first salesperson that's ever let them talk, right? So now they finally get to do something they've never done in a sales meeting. The other is you're asking them to share with you their aspirations moving forward. Which person doesn't want to do that? Especially business people tend to be wound closer to A type. They're strong personalities. They have, usually clear vision. And they start telling you all this stuff that they want to achieve in 18 months. And the hardest part for most salespeople to do is just stay quiet long enough for the guy to finish. And so you take copious notes, and then 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, whenever the prospect on the other side has told you where they want to be 18 months from now, I look them in the eye, go, great. So help me understand why we're not there now. And they'll tell you all the things that are preventing them from being where they want to be 18 months from now. I'll bet we can find something to sell to in that second answer.
And do you find that this has all been thought out, or this is happening live, and they perhaps haven't thought about some of these? I'm hesitant to use the word problems, but essentially problems that they haven't
But it's
uncovered
not
for
a problem. You
themselves.
know what people come back with, for instance, sales VPs, 18 months from now, we'll have increased, our sales into Southeast US, or 18 months from now, we'll have, you know,
How would you describe the word, or what word would you use that is holding them back from doing those things if they're not problems?
there's various barriers, but I guess
All
problem,
right.
and again, I don't want to wordsmith it too much, but I guess when I hear problem, I tend to go negative. I go to the blue side of the
Hmm.
board, right? Because a problem is something I haven't been able to figure out, right? But let's say they know exactly what is preventing them. They need to get some new machines. They need to nail down the last supplier out of China so they can bring down the cost of the material, and they need to bring on another shift, right? Those
Hmm.
are problems of a sort, in as much as until you achieve those, you're not going to be able to get the outcome you want. But they're not real problems. They just stuff that has to get done. Now, if I can accelerate that, right, then I'm helping them. I'll give you an example from my world, and I've talked about this before, but I get a lot of deals using the same technique but making it specific to my world. So again, the cost of playing the game is knowledge. So you have to put in the time and understand things. But over the years, you begin to see certain things that get you traction with VPs of sales in terms of conversations in certain sectors, and other things that don't get you traction. And when you explore that and you go back and you talk to people you won business with, people you lose business with, you find out what their priorities are. And one of the top priorities that most sales organizations have is new customers, right? So
Hmm.
even if their customers love them or whatever, there's always going to be some level of attrition. So if you do nothing else but replace the revenue base that you lose through attrition, you still need to get new customers. So when I go and see the way that I unfold what I just did generically with the 18 months, if I'm talking to a VP of sales, then I'll say something to the effect of, Will, I'm curious how much of your revenue is coming from existing customers versus brand new customers. And they'll always give me a number like 90-10, 85-15. It really doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And then let's say I want to do this by the textbook. I might ask you, so Will, help me understand. Do you define new budgets in an existing account as being a new customer, or do you see that as just organic growth? So it's like a little definition, right? And it's a way for
Sure.
me to telegraph that I actually understand that there's different types of revenues, as opposed to just generic definitions. But it's the next question that gets the ball game going. And I say to them, so, Will, if I looked at your 2015 plan, what did you have in there? And never, man, never in the last 9 years has anybody given me the same number that they gave me when I asked the first question.
Mm.
So, in a very innocent and simple, non threatening, no probing, no rubber gloves, no medical instruments, I just got this guy to put a gap on the table, didn't I? Because if he said originally 90-10, and then when I asked the question, how much of it, if I look at your plan, how much did you have in your plan? And they come back with the obligatory 80-20. I don't know where it is they get that. I guess it must be MBA school, right? So they come back with their 80-20. Well, now there's a gap, right? You said, according to your business plan, what you submitted to your boss was 80-20, and you're only at 90-10, boy. What are you going to do? You don't push that button, but you all of a sudden got them to put a gap on the table, and now they're looking at it. So now you continue the dialogue, and this is what we work with our clients on, is say, really, that's interesting. What do you attribute it to? Now they'll tell you all the things coming in, right? There are people who have call reluctance, they don't have the discipline, they don't know how to handle objections, they continue to spend too much time with their base. You know it. Like all the stuff that I knew in the parking lot, they're not telling me that much new. But they get to say it instead of me. And they get to see, hey, I do have this 10% gap, and here are all the things that I'm attributing it to. In the back of their mind, they're beginning to think, maybe I should do something, right? Because the natural
Mm.
tendency is not to do anything, right? So then we keep pushing on it. So if you were able to achieve that extra 10% of revenue coming from new customers, what would that open up for you? And now I get them to go beyond the obvious of more people making their quota to, is it an opportunity to increase market shares and an opportunity to impact margins? If you have more sales, can you buy more raw materials on a volume basis, which brings down your cost structure? So salespeople have to work. Like it's not going to land in their lap. They have to understand the nature of the business that they're working with. But if they're selling a particular product, you would think they know that. And then because their natural tendency is not to act, you've got to introduce an element of risk. A pinch of risk is good for the recipe, right? So you got to ask them, so what happens if you continue not to achieve your goal? And again, which sales VP isn't cognizant of the fact that if they miss goal on a repeated basis, they could be out of a job, right?
Mm.
So it's a nice way to introduce risk without slapping him in the face and go, boy, you better start working, right? So then once those things are on the table, you ask them, okay, so if you were able to achieve that, what's the monetary value of that? And then extrapolate that out over the life of the asset, right? So if they tell me that the average tenure of their salespeople is 3 years, and by virtue of the training that I'm doing, they're going to be able to increase sales per rep of $50,000, and over 3 years, that's 150,000, and that's what I want the ROI to measure because that allows me to deliver a bigger invoice. So it's not that I was born with this, but if you're selling medical devices, you should be able to have a similar conversation with your target audience. And I could take that same approach and bring up the question of how well are they forecasting? How well are they managing their pipeline? How well are their managers managing and leading and coaching their teams? Because there's always going to be, it's human tendency that we always see more in the future than we have now, right? So if you get them to look forward, there's always going to be something
Mhm.
that they're reaching for. And
Tibor, I'm gonna stop you there just for a second because I've got a question I want to ask. But this is the least I've ever talked in any podcast because this is absolutely fantastic. You're stealing the show here, mate.
well,
And
you asked
just
the
before
question.
I asked the question, you've gone off on one, and it's been amazing. I want to dive into something a bit deeper though. Um, Before you moved on from that point, then of how far do you push the prospect? And it's obviously subjective, but is your goal to come out of that meeting and for the prospect to be cacking their pants that without you there, all hell is going to break loose? Is that the end goal of that meeting where you're diving into all of this,
Well,
or are you just trying to tickle their imagination and get them thinking in the future and doing things a bit softer and a bit lighter?
no. So let's not forget, we're there to sell. And, that's a mercenary activity, and I'm proud of it, right? That's what I've been
Mhm.
tasked to do, is to go out there and generate revenue for my company so I can help other companies. So you have to have an idea of what you want out of each meeting. And, but you have to get them going. So what I want them to do is A, get emotionally reinvested in things that they want to do. So, sometimes people tuck away certain things because they don't see a way of doing it. So if I can get them excited, like in this conversation, I'm giving them examples of, oh, I know exactly what you mean because, there was a situation with this other company, they had this, this, and that, and this is what
Mhm.
they were facing. And then I stop and wait for them to say, yeah, that's exactly the thing that I'm trying to figure out right now. And then I go, great, they were able to achieve that because we did this, that, and the other, right? So I want them excited. I don't want them cacking in their pants saying, what am I going to do without Tibor? I want them excited that, hey, now I've got a horse I could tie my wagon to and I can actually make that journey
Okay.
because he gets me, right? Or he gets the scenario. Again, salespeople have to wake up in the morning and, be real hokey and go look in the mirror and say, I'm a subject matter expert. And they are, right? So you
Mhm.
probably knew more about medical devices than a lot of the people that you were selling to because they only had one specific need. You had to sell to a broad range of audiences, right?
Yeah.
So you were a subject matter expert when it came to medical devices. So again, there's a lot more to it than I'm saying, but you asked in terms of the gap and so on. Um, so I want to get the customer excited that it's worth their time and resources to make a move because that's the biggest barrier, right? People, status quo is our biggest competition and so on. So you have to get them to make a move. And there is data out there that shows that they will. One of the books that sort of got me thinking about all this is a book by two guys called Bell and Patterson called Customer Loyalty Guaranteed. And they talked about how 75% of customers who switch from one vendor to another were satisfied or completely satisfied at the time that they switched. So you can get people who are quote unquote status quo to switch if you have the right conversation with them.
So it's all about getting and I'm totally summarizing like 20 minutes of conversation here, but it's about getting the prospect to understand the gap between not your solution and their problems, but your solution, and the objectives that they're trying to hit in the future, and getting them to visualize it. And then as they're visualizing it, they're putting you into the story rather than you trying to jump in there yourself.
Yeah, I know that I did my sales call right when we go through that process that I mentioned. And again, you have to remember it's conversational. You haven't got them in the chair beating them with a rubber hose. It has to sort of take its course. But, the hardest part I have is not to laugh when at the end of it they go, so is that something you can help me with? And isn't that what every salesperson wants to hear? Instead of having to pitch, 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 to have a conversation where the customer unprompted says to you, is that something you can help me with? I mean, isn't that what we're all looking for? So,
Definitely. And final question on this, Tibor, before we wrap up, mate. But
hmm,
is this an opportunity then to? I don't want to add the word mysterious is the wrong word, but when you initially pitch for the meeting and that side of things, I think a lot of salespeople go, "I can solve this problem. You should meet with me because of this," and then that's the end of it, and essentially sums up the meeting that you're about to have. Is there, if you're going to go down this process and if you're going to do and use the structure you just described,
mhm.
is it worth keeping like not an air of mystery? It's the wrong way of describing it, but I can't think of a better way of you go in there and say, look, you set the meeting up with by saying, look, have an open mind. I think I'm an expert in the industry. I can help you in a number of ways. Let me just see how I can serve you, rather than half pitching the product before you even got in the room, if that makes sense.
So there's an expression out there that some of your older guys might know, and that is, be the play, right? So I could say everything you said, or I could demonstrate it. So when I cold call somebody, and I still cold call, yes, I'm a knuckle dragger. Um, what I put into that cold call is what they're going to get out of dealing with me. So in essence, I feature the objective. So if I was to call you, I'd say, Will, Tibor Shanto here, you probably don't know us, but VPs of sales over at Pitney Bowes, Imperial Oil, and Ricoh use us when they're trying to increase activity in their pipeline, shorten their sales cycles. And what they're telling us in the process is that the accuracy of their forecasts actually went up. So notice I don't talk about me being a sales trainer. I don't talk about what we do. What I talk about is what our customers that they could relate to have achieved by virtue of using us. And what they've achieved is I put out there what are common objectives of the audience that I speak to. So I don't have an air of mystery, but I put an emphasis on the outcome as opposed to the
Mm,
process. So it's the end as opposed to the means. It's the punchline as opposed to the joke. And I always say
fantastic.
lead with the punchline. And most salespeople don't want to do that. They want to build up the whole joke. And just before the client falls asleep, they give them the punchline.
Or yeah, until just before they're about to slam the phone down or just ignore
All right.
you, and obviously you've got the impact then of that initial first impression is obviously so important, isn't it? And if
Yeah.
you screw that up, it's difficult to claw back that rapport after the fact.
Right. So if you telegraph very clearly that you've had success in delivering those things that they see as objectives, there's a reason to talk to you. But if you call this dude and say, hey, do you need sales training? They'll probably hang up on you, which is why people hate cold calling.
Mhm, mm. Okay, well, Tibor, before you tell us a little bit about your blog and your website, where the audience can find out more about you, I've got one question to ask everyone that comes
Hmm.
on the show. You've been on the show before, and so I've already asked you this, but I'm sure because everyone forgets what they say the first time round because I throw it on them. So I'm going to ask you it again, and your answer might be different, but it'd be interesting if it is the same. If you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
I think I remember what I said, but I think, you know, curiosity is your friend. So like be curious, and I think the first time I mentioned the fact that you need to come back and keep at it, but I think one of the
Mm,
things that helps me keep at it is to really be curious about what that gap is that your customer is facing. Can you solve that gap? I think when you're curious and you're having, you know, a funky time and you're facing a downside, it's that same energy that helps you when you're doing well, because if you're curious, you're going to figure out how to get out of that funk and so on. So I think one of the reasons that I can go in and ask these questions over and over again is I know that each prospect is going to be just different enough that the curiosity of that is going to be interesting. So this time I'm going to go with curiosity, Will, for $200.
And obviously, Tibor, you obviously enjoy all this, and so you're interested in asking these questions because seemingly you're into and you find business fascinating, which is obviously part of the product and the service that you're offering. So, from that, second question, and perhaps a yes no answer for this one, do you have to find your product or your service interesting for you to be a good salesperson and be able to sell it efficiently and correctly?
So I'm going to give the unpopular answer and say no. You know, do you need to like everything, Tchaikovsky does to be a great ballet dancer? I don't think so. But, it's good ballet and you get a chance to dance with another world-class artist, so you get a chance to dance with your prospects. So, I don't think you need to be in love with your product to successfully sell it. I think
Do you need to be in love with sales then? Do you need to be in love with the game? Is that the most important thing?
for me it is, it's people don't like the description, but it's sort of like a drug, right? Every time you do it
Yeah.
right, you need another fix and you need a bigger fix, and eventually you become a junkie, but there isn't any of the side effects. In fact, the more of a
You
junkie
just
you
get your
are,
wallet just gets thicker.
yeah, the more of a junkie you are, the more money you make, the more little goodies you can buy and your kids can eat, and the world's good.
Good stuff. Well, with that summary of sales, Tibor, tell us a little bit more where the audience can find out more about you and your business and the services that you offer
My picture can be found in most police stations, but
there.
so you can find me easily at www.sellbetter.ca, sellbetter.ca, or you can phone +1 416 822 7781. And my blog is again at www.sellbetter. Sorry, sellbetter. Yeah, .sellbetter.ca. Too many dots in this world. /blog.
Fantastic stuff. We'll link to all that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that, Tibor, I want to thank you for your time. You killed it on today's show, mate. And I want to thank you for coming on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. Always fun.
And there we have it. Thank you again, Tibor, for coming on the show. Second appearance. I appreciate it, mate. I will be actually reaching out to him. I'm sure he'll listen to this in a few weeks' time, so I want to come back on. I think this is well worth diving into further. Thank you, the listener, as always, for tuning in. And I'll speak with you again tomorrow.